Hi everyone. Looks like we're live. Um,
Yeah,
okay, great. So let's get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shubhra. I lead the research and M&E team at Central Square Foundation. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to today's session, which is making EdTech accessible at scale, bridging the digital divide, as part of the education track at CHADSA 2021. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, and I'm at a personal level, really excited to hear from each of them today. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for today's discussion. We have with us Mr. Anwar Sadat. He's the CEO of Kerala Infrastructure and Technology for Education, established by the government to foster ICT education and infrastructural development in school education. Um, he, of course, has many accolades, but the one that I would like to share with everybody is that he's the first Indian to receive the International Contributions Award for his contribution to educational technology, instituted by US based AECT in 2018. Thank you, sir, and welcome to the panel discussion. Next, we have with us Mr. Aditya Chopra. He's Senior Manager at Samagra Transforming Governance, a mission driven governance consulting firm in India. He's leading the firm's education programs with the governments of Haryana and Himachal Pradesh, where these programs are focused on improving learning outcomes for around 3 billion government school going children. Thanks, Aditya, for joining us today.
thank you,
Um,
Shubhra.
we have Ms. Dayung Lee. She's an associate partner and a co-lead of the Education to Employment practice at Dalberg. She focuses on strategy and policy development, innovative finance, and monitoring evaluation and learning at Dalberg. She's led a study on the impact of COVID on student learning in India with UNICEF. And some of her other work includes designing a tool for private sector companies to become inclusive workplaces for women, and much more recently on assessing the cost effectiveness of education interventions. Thanks a lot, Dayum, for joining us today. Um, and finally, we- um, we have Mr. Nishant Baghel. He leads the digital initiatives at Pratham as Director of Technology Innovations, which is leveraging advanced technologies for rural EdTech and creating learning opportunities for all. He's overseeing programs that are spread across multiple states and have been recognized by the World Economic Forum as the only school of future from India. Thank you, Nishant, for joining as well today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you for being here, and I'm really excited about the next sort of 15 minutes and having a really productive discussion. But before we get started, just really delighted to share that CSF is releasing the second edition of the School Education in India 2021 report today. And this year's report really focuses on synthesizing the data and evidence that we have on the scale and scope of the disruption in school education caused by the pandemic, and the educational response to the crisis that we've seen. I'll really just draw upon very specific sections of the report to set the context for today's discussion. Um, Requesting my colleague Ratan to share the link of the report in the chat box, and it's also up on our website for those of you interested to read more about it. So, without wasting just 1 minute. Um, Great. And so I think we all know that schools in India have been closed since March 2020, possibly the longest in around the world, and this has led to disruption of school education for millions of children and a loss of learning opportunities as well. Roughly 320 million children have been affected. And while the primary effect has been on learning outcomes, they've of course been affected in many other aspects, including health and also their lifetime opportunities in terms of income, productivity. A recent study by the Azim Premji Foundation that targeted children in grades 2 to 6 found that nearly 82% of these children had lost one specific mathematical ability, and 92% had lost at least one specific ability in language. So this is quite enormous in terms of the learning loss that we're talking about. Um, as schools had to shut down suddenly, I think our governments, both at the center and states, did an incredible job in responding to this new situation and introduced various measures to support at-home learning. But of course, what we've seen as a result of this is that there's been an outsized focus on using technology and online learning as part of these measures. And a recent survey by UNICEF, found that teachers really relied predominantly on WhatsApp for teaching during the pandemic, with 89% of teachers using WhatsApp for teaching. And traditional means of teaching like textbooks was just really down below at about 21%. In fact, really excited that Dayum worked very closely on this study. So really looking forward, Dayum, to hearing more about the study and having you share more insights from this study as we go along the discussion. Right? And so really what this brought out much more starkly now than ever before is the lack of access to digital infrastructure, which is really needed to leverage learning and online learning. And a survey by Pratham last year, showed that while there's been a significant increase in smartphone ownership in India, especially in rural area, we're still looking at more than a third of our children not having access to a smartphone right now. And we can all imagine, right, that there are a lot of inequalities in access. One instance being that younger children are less likely to have access to smartphone and remote learning material than older children, right? And it's truly important as we look at the disruption to look at these inequalities. Um, Finally, even kind of looking at the from like a parent's perspective, right? What is it that truly sort of inhibited their ability to support their children's learning during the pandemic? And really, the top three things that stand out are all around digital access. So it's around data costs, device affordability, as well as network connectivity, right? That's really been the biggest impediments that households and families have faced during the pandemic. Um, and so, kind of taking a step back, right? I mean, as we look at a society and the strides that we as a country have made in digitization and digital revolution, I think really important to kind of realize and understand that there is still a divide that exists, and it is multi-dimensional, right? And while we look at digital access, we need to pay attention to the urban-rural divide, gender divide, like we've talked about, other sorts of divides that exist as we try and bridge this gap in not just education but also in other sectors. So yeah, this is a report. There is a lot more in the report, which is, please do see it. But coming back to the panel and the discussion that we had for today, right? And maybe just even taking a step forward and saying that we're all talking about just how COVID has deepened the digital divide that we're seeing, especially in education. And in the past, we've seen several device distribution programs being rolled out, both globally by several states in India. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the evidence around these programs is pointing to just the limited impact it had on student learning outcome. What COVID sort of has changed in terms of this dynamic is to say that it's made it a priority to solve for this issue right now. We are going to see it's unlikely that even next year we'll be back in a normal school environment, and we might sort of be, tossing between at-home learning, in school. And truly, in that context, it becomes just more critical to solve for this digital divide that we're seeing right now. And so the question is not really whether this needs to be solved for, it's more about how best to solve for it, how to design really successful programs that are going to be scalable and cost effective. So with that, I'm really going to kick off the discussion and really looking at the next 45 minutes to learn from our panelists the work that they're doing, how they're going about this issue and challenge, and how do we really think about success for programs and initiatives looking at solving this digital divide. Great. So let's get started. So my first set of questions to all of you is really about understanding from your respective work, right? What are some innovative models and approaches that you have looked at or are introducing to solve for this access divide that we're talking about? And maybe I'll begin with you, Mr. Anrat Sadat. And so I know, Kerala has been doing lots of initiatives around digital, digital initiatives even before COVID. And unlike some of the previous initiatives, the initiatives that you've introduced in the last 1 year have focused on truly looking at providing access to students with the intent of improving the effectiveness of online learning for these students. Would love if you can share a little bit about a couple of initiatives that the Kerala government has launched, and also just what the government's thinking and approach has been as you've introduced some of these initiatives.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Shubhra. In fact, now, when the COVID pandemic came last year, normally we had to start our academic year on 1st June onwards. This pandemic came in March in India in 2020 March, and the examination, after completing certain examination, it has to stop. Then we took 2-3 months basically for remote broadcast mode campaign and engaging children with some sort of online activity. But when the schools are about to start, it was very difficult. We thought at least for 2-3 months we should have an alternate strategy. And the Kerala, we have the expertise of handling digital education for the last 2 decades. It started here in early 2000, actually, in 2000, 2001. IT is a subject, and the government has rolled out a program, high-tech school program, wherein 45,000 classroom made smart in 2019, and that is from 8 to 12 classes. From 1 to 7, it was completed by 2019 end, just before the COVID. So all digital ecosystem is there in place, and teachers are trained. Fortunately, we had an exclusive educational channel called Victors, which works on EduSat, which has been launched in 2006. Okay, so the strategy which the government, I will make it very brief because of the time limitation. The mode since the schools on the June 1st, the way ahead for us was either to go for an online mode or to go an alternate mode. But online, we don't have any data on the internet plus device access on that. But we have the channel, Victor's channel, so we thought of the broadcast mode. So the government have made a clear direction with a program called First Bill program, which have 3 components. One, it's not an alternate to the regular classroom. It's just to bridge the academic gap for some time. Second one, all students should have access to this program. Third one, after the TV program, teachers should do the continuous follow-up through social media or through direct or different modes. So these were the 3 pillars for the program. When coming to providing access, TV is required, and if the broadcast mode is parallel to the broadcast mode, we have the YouTube channel and live mobile app and live stream for the Victors. Now our YouTube channel has gone to 3 million plus. It was earlier less than 50,000 K. So it has gone to 3 million. Certain classes you can see that it has gone to even 5 million, 50 lakhs views. So in the to provide the access, I will come to the short. What we have done last year, this year thing is very different. But last year, see, out of 78.5 lakhs families in Kerala, 73 lakh have access to TV either through cable or DTH. But the Victors were available only in the cable network, which caters only 63% of the population. Remaining 37 was left behind. So we could able to bring in all DTH operators in the country which are operating in Kerala to carry Victors. So all platforms started carrying Victors channel. So that's one point. Only 7% of the total population households are left behind. Then there was a gap of 2.6 lakh students who don't have access either TV, mobile, or internet with a laptop with internet. And there was a big campaign, especially through the local self-government institutions, NGOs, and to the government level. So instead of putting on a centralized access program, the government has decentralized it, and this 2.6 lakhs bring down to within 1 month it has come down to 1 lakh. In June 1st, it was 12,000, and by June 14th, the number has been reduced to zero. So either through a TV or through other mobile or tablet or laptop, the access has been ensured. So it was a socially driven program wherein the local self-government institutions and representatives, along with the government, came together to ensure that all the students have access to the digital program. This is what happened for the last year. Maybe in the next session or somewhere I will explain what is the strategy right now, or if you want I can explain that as of now itself. Is it okay? I cannot hear.
Sorry. Maybe, sir, if very briefly, if you want to just talk about what the strategy is
Fine.
this
Okay.
year,
So
and if you've introduced any programs which have provided devices to students specifically, would
yeah,
be good to.
okay, I'll come to that, because so the 2021 it was more of digital classes. Along with this, the government has started a program for providing in the student level laptop to 2 lakh students, which with 3-year warranty, and all operating system and other application which are on free software which is inbuilt. So the cost expected was around 15,000 rupees at that time, but after the tender it has gone to 18,000. The model is like that. The BPL families, there is a big neighborhood group with which works on microcredit and all, called Kudumbashri in Kerala. So the Kerala State Financial Enterprises, along with the Kudumbashri, IT Mission, Kite, came together and started a program called Vidyashri. You can access that website, and the idea was it was not giving free at that time. They have to contribute 500 per month for 30 months, so around 15,000 rupees, out of which 5,000 will be the subsidy. Okay. After paying 3 months, that means after paying 1,500 in 3 months, they will get the laptop. And the initial idea was to have 2 lakhs laptop, but the availability was an issue. The scheme is going on. The government is remodeling that, and around 59,000 orders were placed for this thing is going on. But the government has now come up with a bigger scheme called Vidya Kiranam, wherein 4.7 lakh students government is providing laptops through a specific chief minister's redressal relief program sort of thing, and in a campaign mode with the participation of NRIs and by Captain CSR program and all. So this Vidyashri was an eye opener for us, but right now we understand that even if you have the money and all the facilities in place, the issue of availability of devices is a crucial issue. It may be for 6 to 8 months minimum. The second part is to have the internet access, because the devices itself will not work. But Honorable Chief Minister himself has met all the ISPs which are operating in the state, and first priority was given to tribal sectors. We have around 1,200 tribal sectors, out of which 125 was a serious issue, and 200 plus colonies where the existing providers were agreed to extend their capacity or providing fiber. Exemptions were given to lay fiber on the forest area. So that program is on the way of completing, ensuring access to tribal first, then it will be easier to have the mainland. So basically, one side the content component, all this part which Kaita has earlier been focusing, then the devices part, like streams like Kudumbashri. For Vidya Kiranam, if I get time, I will explain that more with that data. Then providing the connectivity. So with this in a three-pronged way, the comprehensive intervention has been going here in Kerala.
No, that's great to know. Thank you so much, sir. And maybe, Aditya, I'll move to you, right? Because you're again working with two governments, Himachal Pradesh and Haryana, and they also have certain similar initiatives. And maybe just really quickly understanding what is the approach these two states are taking, and almost in the context of what Sir just talked about with the Vidyashri scheme, right?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me. So let me talk about the programs in Haryana and Himachal. So Himachal actually is slightly different from device donation by the government. It is more about device donation by individuals and the public at large. So what we figured in Himachal was that we were running a very successful sort of Har Ghar Pachala online learning campaign, but a lot of students were not able to access either by lack of devices or by lack of internet. And so we've started a program with the government for donation of devices, of course, reaching out to both corporate and individuals. And the numbers are somewhere around 1 to 1.5 lakh children not having access, roughly around 20%. In Haryana, that is, we're following a different route. The Haryana model, of course, is a little more evolved. The state is digitally better connected. And here we figured that we have to get to a personalized and adaptive learning model for students. And so, like Anvarji was also saying, we are also looking at sort of giving devices from the state government side. The idea is to give devices to students, all students of grade 8 to 12. Roughly 8 to 9 lakh students will get individual devices. On these devices, will ensure that we have personalized and adaptive learning software with the relevant content, and of course, also providing data, internet, and so forth facilities. Right. So broadly, these are the two programs. One thing I'll highlight here now. When we look at other programs of states sort of in the past, a lot of these programs become device distribution programs, right? You give out the hardware, and then it becomes difficult to track what the child is doing and who all are involved in the child's learning through this device. Right? So what we've tried to ensure is that we put, so although the theory of change is that student agency is at the core of it, right? The student should be able to drive adaptive practice, personalized remediation, all of that. However, teacher also remains a key stakeholder in our programs. And so just designing the program around the teaching learning cycle happening in the classroom, ensuring that the roles and responsibilities are very, very clear to all actors, including teachers, including mentors, including officials. And of course, ensuring that sort of data also plays a key role. So I'll stop here and I'll wait for your question.
No, thanks, Aditya. And we'll come back to knowing more about what Haryana and Himachal are doing. But I'll move on to Nishant, to you, right? And Pratham's, of course, takes a very different approach, which is very much community driven, right? And right now we've been talking about a 1:1 sort of device distribution program, which is structured differently by the states. Pratham, of course, operates with the community and more of 1:many model. Would love for you to talk a little bit about what Pratham's approach has been, how it's evolved, and really what the sort of the core pillars are for the program that you're running in your communities. It's a very large scale. I think you've distributed about 30,000 devices so far and touched many more lives. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Shubhra, for the question, and thanks for having me here. What we started out in 2015 was an experiment that we call Prodigy Learning Initiative, short for Pratham Digital. The idea was to try and get technology in the hands of children. Pratham has been involved in digital initiatives since 2005. We have been supporting school systems to implement infrastructure in schools and also add on the learning curriculum, which is digital led in the schools itself. But one of the things that we felt is to give more agency to the children. Getting technology in the hands of children is something that we want to do. And that was the thought with which we started out the experiment in 2015. There were tablets that were preloaded with content. So there was no need of internet as such. The content, again, was a mixed age, mixed grade content. And rather than going one-to-one, as you rightly pointed out, we made sure that there is a community ownership. There is a group of children who are accessing this tablet. So we got a group of 5 children who shared this tablet, and the ownership of the tablet was shared between the parents of these children. So this became more of a community device, and rather than being my device and my neighbor's device. What we tried to do is learn from the previous initiatives, especially the one laptop per child and hole in the wall. And what we, I'm sorry, what we did, sorry, what we did was moved a step further from, as Aditya rightly pointed out, keeping it to just device distribution and building a program around it. It was important for us that the stakeholders are not limited to just the learner and the teacher, rather the parents play a big role. And that's where we designed infrastructures which are not just digital infrastructure, but a social infrastructure as well to support the program. We ensured that community members have a role to play. So they were not just custodians and guardians of the tablet, they also had specific role in the learning process. There are committees in the village which organize events to judge various projects that the children are making. They do certificate distribution. The sarpanch of the village is involved in looking at monthly report of how the children are progressing. The parents are involved in the learning activity, and the youth in the village are playing a big role as coaches so that they get some educational activities for themselves, but also create learning avenues for the younger children. The idea was primarily to make sure that the community has a say, and the three pillars of digital infrastructure, social infrastructure, and curriculum work together. What we have been able to do is go beyond the school curriculum and focus also on learning for school, learning for life, and learning for work. According to us, in the kind of program that we are doing, this is not mandated, or it is not a mandate for the child to do certain courses. We always offer an array of courses and say that you can pick what you want. If you want to pick music for this month as your course, you're free to do that. But if you want to pick music and science, you're free to do that as well. The idea was primarily self-organized learning, but learning with peers. And for that, the content was designed in a very specific manner, where we were not just delivering the concepts, but rather building activities into it. And that's the content repository that we have open sourced. One of the reasons to start this initiative was also the need that we saw of regional language content. Back in the day, in 2015, I think after COVID, the numbers have definitely changed. But back in the day, we did not have a lot of easily available content in regional languages. So we started creating content in 12 regional languages. And we made a promise that all of this would be open source for anyone to use. But all of it is activity-based learning to make sure that children do something and learn together. And what we have been able to do is scale this model within Pratham. We work with different age groups. The device in the community is not just a device for a particular age group of learners. That is a device of the community. So the mothers use it. We have put in recipes for mothers. We have put in other tools that the youth can use. So it becomes more of a device of the community, and hence we are able to get it used more and more. Sure.
This is really fantastic, Nishan. Thank you so much. And I think it almost talks about how you can create shared value for both at a household and a community level through some of these programs. I think, Dayo, coming to you, right, and almost requesting you to wear a little bit of the M&E hat, right? We've heard about various different models and approaches, right, that states and say Pratham is taking, and I'm sure there are several other models that other organizations have taken globally as well as in India. I guess from you and your perspective, right, what is almost the data and evidence that you see on how successful these models and programs have been in bridging the access gap? Where are the challenges that we're still seeing? So would love to kind of get your thoughts just more from the data and evidence perspective. And then I think the second question that if I can just have you maybe reflect a little bit upon is, the digital divide is not unique to the education sector. And is there anything that the education sector can learn from other sectors, for instance, health or others, that are also trying different approaches to solve the problem?
Thank you so much, Shubhra, and thanks for having me here. I think our speakers already shared so many innovations and important practices, and I think the data largely backs that up. So the UNICEF work that we did showed that, a third of the students, or more than that in some states, don't have access to smartphones. But this reduces to less than 10% who don't have access to any devices, including things like smartphones and TV, right? And so, as Mr. Sadath mentioned, we find that access really improves a lot when you use multiple modalities of distribution. So when you include TV, when you include things like feature phones. And so making sure that students who have access to one of these devices get some programming. And I think, as Nishant mentioned, the other things that the data really shows effectiveness around is combining digital with community-based interventions. Because of the interactive nature of what you can do in person, if that can be done safely with all the COVID protocols and so forth, we've seen that that can really improve reach. An organization in Delhi called Society for All-Round Development that we work very closely with, they were able to increase reach by 15 to 20% when they were sort of augmenting their digital programs with some sort of in-community intervention as well. And as you mentioned, I think what we can learn from other sectors, this idea of phygital, I think is just really important principle. We've seen in the financial inclusion sector, for example, with MFIs, they're increasingly equipping their banking correspondents with tablets and back-end capability so that they can do things like KYC, a lot of that digitally. But they're still going in the communities and actually working with people door to door to build that kind of trust and reach the last mile customer. And so the idea of combining digital smartly with in-person interactions can really boost reach. And I think the other important piece of data that we've seen is really around the differential impact on different groups of students. I think Mr. Sadath mentioned tribal students really lacking connectivity. We've seen from our study that adolescent girls, for example, are 8% less likely to have access to smartphones than adolescent boys. Rural children, 15% less than urban children. And so in all of these programs, we've seen that it's really important to take that diversity and inclusion lens and think about how to reach these students in very different ways, depending on what barriers they may have. Now, for example, for girls, if there are limited devices available in a household, that often goes to boys. And so how might we incentivize households to actually provide access to girls as well? Maybe they can couple that with providing subsidized data for students, households who have girl children, for example. And so, and the final point that I want to bring out is the challenge that special needs students really face. I think that's a group that's especially difficult to tackle with digital devices. But there's been a lot of innovation, and we've seen programs, educational content, right, and features that are multi-sensory. So having live caption for the audio impaired, and making sure that there's visually impaired kids can have sound going with it. And so making sure that the programs have various ways to address the challenges that students with disabilities face is another important finding from our study. And I would say the final piece I want to bring out is the affordability of data. We've seen that that's really one of the key challenges. Addressing the core connectivity issue is important. Device, definitely important. Accessibility of content, important. But what about the cost of data? And there we've seen that actually globally, a lot of interesting partnerships with mobile and internet providers to subsidize the cost of data for educational websites. And you can do zero rating, essentially list the websites that are hosting educational content, and make sure that that fee is waived, essentially. And so innovations like that can really, I think, help tackle multiple access barriers along connectivity to device access, to data affordability, to actually accessibility of the content itself.
No, thanks, Diane, for bringing it all together so well and almost just talking about how the device is just one of the many things that one needs to solve for as we're talking about this digital divide, and something that all of the panelists have reflected upon, right? Where it's the device, it's internet, it's the software package, and a lot of the other things that need to be wrapped around. And this really helps to segue into the next section, right? Where we know a lot of these kinds of programs are very expensive programs, right? And so how do you almost think about the M&E and the data that you are getting from these programs so that you know what the program is almost being able to achieve? It's possibly the easiest is to get the device into the hands of the people you intend to. It's the usage, and it's what is changing in terms of the for the user in terms of their learning, which is much more harder. And I would love to know from all of our panelists just a little bit about this. So maybe Mr. Sadat, starting with you, sir, right? As part of the Vidyashri, what were some of the data points that were of interest to you and that have almost guided some of the more subsequent sort of programs that you're rolling out, as well as any sort of decisions that you took to course correct the program rollout?
Yeah, thank you. No, after first of all, no, to just a deviation from the track. As we all know, I think all of us will agree to that this pandemic and subsequent closing of schools have affected like anything. So even we tried hard to ensure at least minimum class access, maybe half an hour or 1 hour per day to children through various means. It's not through the digital way, but the gap that was created, especially the mental the issues and all, it's we are not equipped to handle such a pandemic, and even the digital technologies have not come up to a level of minimizing that gap, at least to a certain level. So that's a must feedback. So the school has to reopen, and the physical interaction has to happen. So that's one thing. Second one, to this pandemic has forced many states or governments to come up to a sort of solution without doing the background work, or without creating the right environment for same thing. Even in Kerala, we are fortunate to start the digital literacy program in 2003, which was inaugurated by the then President Honorable APJ Abdul Kalam Abdul Kalam. We have ensured computer literacy on 2003 to 7, at least one person at home. It was started in a district called Malappuram, where I was heading that program, where 6 lakhs families have been given IT training in 2005. So this sort of background work is there, and the persistent, continuous effort for bringing the digital divide is there. But still, I'm not at all happy for the poor kids which are suffering as of now. So we should rise to the occasion and to do the all environmental factors in a holistic way, so as to face the situation even
Sure.
after the school reopen. So
Yeah.
though it's a long
Yes.
sentence, but
Yes. No, thank you so much, sir. And maybe Nishant, moving to you, right? Pratham's always been very strong around data and research. And maybe in terms of the program, right? Just would look to understand from you what are the kinds of data points that Pratham has been, very closely tracking around, that community hybrid program, and almost how do you think about how do you get individual level data and usage when you have multiple people using a device? Would just really love some quick thoughts and comments from you on this.
Sure, Shubhra. Data always, I will divide it in 2 buckets. One is data for the people who look at data, and data for whom it means action. So if I talk about the first bucket, that would probably be people like us who are running the program. And what data do we want to see? We want to see that the tablets are being used, that there is engagement, and then there is learning outcome. What we do is we divide the engagement part into what we want to see a group doing. So rather than looking at individual usage and how many times did an individual use, did the group come together? Once again, the concept of phygital is very important. So rather than just restricting us to data coming from the device itself, which again we have designed in a manner to collect to be generated offline and to be collected offline, so that we don't really need internet, but we also look at the data that is being generated of the activities that the children are doing. So the projects they are making, the videos that they are shooting, the photographs that they are making, and what level of engagement that they have outside the device, because that's equally important. Now, that's the data that we like to look at. But talking about the data for people who want to take action, it has to be simple, it has to be easy to communicate, and it has to be a part of the routine. Pratham has been doing this for many years. Something as simple as putting up a board in the village, and when we used to do the learning camps, putting where the children are over a period of a month as we were doing the learning camps, tells everyone in the community where their community is, where the children are. Well, we have taken that concept and brought it to a village report card, a digital village report card at that. And that report card is accessible to an individual as to how many skills am I learning, to my parents, how is my child doing, to the group, how is my group doing as compared to the other groups, and to the sarpanch of the village to say how is your village doing and how are the other villages doing as well. Now that kind of an ownership on data is something that is very important. Otherwise, I think we do like to look at a lot of data, but to convert it in action, we have to give it to the people who will actually take action on it.
Super important, Nishant, and a really important point that it's important that the data goes back to the people who, the users as well. Dayo, coming to you, right? I mean, designing an M&E for a program like this is always challenging, and maybe from your perspective, what would a good M&E for such a program look like? How do you what are some of the indicators that one needs to track? Nishant's already talked about a few of them, but anything else that you might want to add to it? Issues around data reliability for such kind of programs, would sort of keeping it a little bit more broad and open for you to respond to.
Yeah, thanks, Shubhra. Yeah, I think Nishant mentioned all the key principles. I would say, it's pretty comprehensive, not only measuring just the inputs, number of devices in the hands of students, but ensuring that we are tracking outputs, the percentage of kids who are actually using it, the amount of time they're using it, and engagement. Are they actually submitting assignments and doing the homework and so forth? And finally, learning outcomes if possible, right? And I think a key principle that Nishant also mentioned is making sure that the data that you collect is actionable, especially for those who are benefiting from the programs. And I would just add the importance of, again, disaggregated data for a better understanding of which groups of students may be left out or having differential sort of engagement, right? Students with special education needs, girl children versus boys. I think as researchers, we often just look at these as big groups, but really understanding what might be the intersectionality across these different groups and which groups may be left out because of certain barriers. I think it's important and influence how the program gets designed again.
No, thanks, Dayong. And just being mindful of time, we have 2 minutes, but I think we can go for another 5 minutes. So really quickly, maybe just getting some very quick closing thoughts from all of you in terms of the way forward, right? And maybe Aditya, starting with you in this section, right? And saying, what is in general your experience been about from the kind of demand from governments to introduce a program like this, and what is the role that you think an organization like Samagra and you can play as part of kind of having more of these programs being designed holistically?
Yeah, thanks. So a lot of things actually. So the idea for these programs is that stakeholders across the board have to have a win in this program. Right? It's not just about the students, but when it comes to designing and implementing, everybody should have something to look forward to, something that adds value. And so I think this starts with the political leadership. Right? What COVID has done is it has sort of increased appetite of the political leadership to engage in such topics and at least be open to the idea that money can be spent here. What our role is that we sort of convert this appetite into a program, that it manifests on the ground. Right? So the increasing appetite on the political leadership, I think, is the first point. The second I would say is just helping the bureaucracy design a program for scale, where tech and data play a key role. That I think becomes the second important point. Third, I would say that because there are so many stakeholders involved, especially in a complex ecosystem like education, orienting everybody for a common goal, for a common vision, and helping the government do that, I think becomes key. That everybody is using the same language, everybody is shooting for the same outcomes. That I think becomes very important. And last but not least, I would say that we really have to keep at it. Such programs at scale are sort of long lead items. They take a lot of time. A lot of situations can change at the political level, at the bureaucratic level, things on the ground. So we really have to keep at it. That's I think one of the key things that we bring to the table, to be sort of orienting everybody to the same goal, getting a win-win going, and just really being at it.
No, thanks. Thanks, Aditya, for putting it together so well. And maybe Nishant, very quickly, maybe like 30 seconds, sort of, quick thoughts from you, right? Pratham's model has been really successful. What do you think would it take for a government to almost adopt and adapt that model and approach, right? And where do you almost see some challenges or roadblocks in that happening from experience?
Right. I think we talked about the integration of technology and integration of the device distribution and the programming. That definitely is the first thing. And the second is community ownership, how to bring the community into the fold, and not just as a means of increasing ownership of the learning, but also as a means of reducing the cost that we are incurring on the outcomes that we want to get to. If a device is actually shared by various stakeholders in the community for different learning activities, then the overall cost that we are incurring definitely goes down. So what will it take for us to bring in the community, trust the community, and make sure that they are a part of what we are doing as well?
Fantastic. Thanks, Aditya. And maybe Mr. Sadat, if you can just maybe reflect on what Nishant has said, and even from your perspective, right? How do you think about incentivizing governments? How do you think governments can be incentivized to make this a priority, given budget is also so critical for these programs? Aditya and Nishant have talked about a few things, but anything else that you'd like to add from your end?
Yeah. In fact, no. Right from 2018, the internet has given us a basic rights in Kerala through its budget speech, and that is why government has launched a program, Kerala Fiber Optical Network (KFON), which ensures free internet to 2 million families. So this has been driven at the level of Honorable Chief Minister itself, and the participation of all stakeholders are ensured. So the next one, from the digital education, when we go to the online education, the gaps within the students, out of 38 lakh students, 4.7 lakh students have been identified, they need support. 50% of students already have the devices, and the rest of them can manage either through loan or themselves, but 12%, 4.7 lakh, they need devices, for which the government has launched a program called Vidya Kiranam, which is around 1,000 crore, but it will be implementing through the community participation. So along with the government budget, and it should not be a program of any department. That is most important. It should not be a program of IT or education, but there should be a common, because that is the major hurdle in most of the governmental program. And the participation of civil, the Pratham sort of NGOs, organizations, civil society, it should, could be kept in. Even the industries are very keen. So there should be a combined effort to build this, to bridge the divide. And the plan here is to build Kerala as a knowledge society, which is not only for education, but basic health, so many advancements, though the COVID numbers are very high in Kerala, but several initiatives in the health sector, and the livelihood, because that's most important as of now. So there should be holistic intervention, and the my keep one last point is that the infrastructure which built or the devices which are deployed should not be exclusively for education or health, but it should be for a common with community and intergovernmental association. This thing. Then this opportunity, this pandemic can be taken as an opportunity for our country to leapfrog further.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Anwarji, for those comments and maybe sort of, thoughts from you, Dayong, almost in terms of from an M&E lens and perspective, what would you say in terms of recommendations for governments and CSOs, right, where there is almost a need to kind of roll out some of these programs very quickly on ground? Any common pitfalls to avoid? Would love to get that perspective from you.
Yeah, we talked a lot about access, but that's almost a starting point, right? I think it's important to make sure that that then translates to meaningful engagement and at the end of the day, student learning to bring it full circle. And so while access is so important, ensuring that there's good focus and we're managing for also how that then gets used, I think it's really important to remember. And then finally, mistakes are really costly when it's rolled out at large scale. So making sure we're iterating and building and de-risking by building in small experiments. We can very easily figure out what's working and what's not when we're working with 100 households. But when we're working with 300,000 households, that becomes much more difficult to rectify. And so just taking an iterative approach is something else that I emphasize as the end.
No, Darren, that's a really important point to make, and something that we all need to kind of remember, right? I know we're a little bit out of time. I don't know if there's a question from the audience that we can maybe take. I'm just. I think Pratham has been okay. Maybe what I'll do is I think the 3-4 things that at least have stood out for me as part of this entire conversation, and I know I'm not going to do justice to kind of bringing out all the nuances that the 4 of you've talked about, which are all so critical and relevant as we look at bridging this digital divide. But I guess the one, things that we almost need to keep at our minds, right? Making sure equity is a consideration as we're designing these kinds of programs and models. Ensuring the link with the community, as well as possibly even teachers, right? To close the loop on the learning is sound, and our programs are designed well to take that link into account. And then, access is just one piece of the puzzle. It's more about getting people to use the device and engage with the device, and the sustained usage and that translating into learning outcomes, that's going to be critical. And so paying attention to data and what data is saying is going to be important. And in that perspective, Dayong, really borrowing from what you said, right? We before thinking about scale, we also should think about piloting and iterating and learning, so that these programs are designed to be successful. It's much harder to roll back an at-scale program, and so maybe avoiding that pitfall that we can potentially find ourselves in. But thank you to all 4 of you from us at CSEC as well as the Nudge Foundation and organizers. It's been a really fantastic discussion, and I think you all have brought out some really important aspects of this entire challenge that we're all grappling with and solving in our own respective ways. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.